Hey everyone, topic number 3 with Anna Kelly is one that's near and dear to my heart, just because what is going on in the environment now and all the kind of chatter by those YouTube entertainers. And that is, what's going on with inflation? Do we think about it as experienced investors? Is it our friend? Is it our enemy? Just what is going on? So Anna, when I say inflation's going up, does that worry you at all? What do you think? What's going on?
So first of all, this is really complicated, right? Because there's different types of inflation. And that's why when I hear people say we're going to mass inflation or mass deflation, it's like, well, what do you really mean, right?
Exactly.
So there's two main types of inflation that I think of as an investor, right? The first is what happens to the dollar? Does the value of the dollar go up? Is the dollar inflated? Or does the value of the dollar go down? Is the dollar deflated? The second thing is consumer price index. Essentially, how much is it going to cost us to buy the same goods tomorrow that we're paying something different for today? And one of the things that we consume or buy is real estate, right? So typically, consumer price index goes up, the cost of everything goes up. We have real inflation, then the price of your rents and the price of your properties are going to go up too, right? But what happens with the value of the dollar is that as inflation happens and the cost of goods go up and the cost of everything we buy goes up, sometimes, especially if we've pumped a lot of money into the system like the government has, the value of the dollar and what it can purchase, its purchasing power goes down. So you have monetary deflation at the same time that you have consumer cost of goods inflation. And that is really the question is the dollar going to inflate or deflate? And is the cost of goods and our real estate and assets going to inflate or deflate? And I get a little more scared about the value of the dollar deflating than necessarily, normal inflation of the cost of goods over time.
Yeah, so let's talk about the second one first, because I think we're definitely in agreement there, right? CPI, Consumer Price Index, food, gas, shelter, all those things, healthcare, all those things that we have. I think that's going up. And the interesting thing about inflation is we have kind of two things going on today. One we keep hearing about is kind of supply chain disruption, right? Something that's kind of an unintended consequence of the pandemic is supply chains are disrupted. It first started in automobiles of all things, right? There wasn't enough chips. So there were manufacturing lines that had to slow or in some cases shut down. Then it was computers. Now it's graphic cards and freaking cell phones, right? We have a problem in the supply chain that is, it's just a supply problem, and that can have at least momentary inflation. And that's where you hear Janet Yellen saying, don't worry about it. It's short term. Sorry, basically. And I think that's wishful thinking, but I at least understand what Janet Yellen is saying.
Yeah.
And then
the cost of a lot of things have gone up significantly because of that supply chain. I mean, trying lumber to get windows, lumber, appliances, it's very difficult to even get them. And because the demand is so high and the supply is low, it's disrupted. They're getting top dollar. Nothing's on sale anymore. Everything's going up. And so you have like these basket of goods. You'll hear that term thrown out where it's the normal things that we Americans buy all the time, bread and milk and things like that. And then you've got these other things that we really need to keep the economy going. And a lot of it has gone up in price during the pandemic.
Yeah. So, there is talk, and of course, the powers that be and the Fed think it's going to be short term. Short term for them is probably 4 quarters or less, meaning windows will be cheaper in a year than they are today or would. I mean, I spent almost 200% on a fence, just like a 40-yard fence, not because labor went up. It was all because the freaking 2x4s and pickets went up. So yeah, we're going to see what's going on there. Then there's the things like rent and like asset values, right? There's asset inflation as well.
Right.
And, you can go back and listen to topic 1 and 2 with Anna this morning, and, they can poke that bubble, right? And one of the ways to do that is higher interest rates, because people don't buy on price, they buy on payment. So we could see, I mean, if rates jump from, let's call it 3.5 to 6 tomorrow, that would impact prices, right?
Yeah. We've already seen a 43% decline in new house applications in the last month.
Yeah.
because rates have ticked up 0.8%. At the last I checked earlier this week, it was about 0.8% that they had ticked up in the last few months. And so it definitely decreases demand when rates go up because people can't afford that same payment, to your point. So they do try to control general inflation of real estate and other assets through interest rates for sure. The other thing, just to that point, is the government wants asset values to go up because the more assets they own that go up in value, the easier it is to sell it to pay down their debt, right? So when you have an economy right now where the government has literally put trillions of dollars into the system through the CARES Act, they want to be able to pay that debt down with inflated dollars. And part of the way that they do that is they try to inflate the value of the dollar, inflate the value of the assets and the things that they own so they can sell it and pay down their debt at today's dollar with money that buys you more in the future than it did today. And so the government wants inflation. They do not want a deflated dollar.
No question.
Despite the fact that they're pumping all this money, there are real fears of that could cause the value of the dollar to deflate significantly. And they've got to play this fine dance to try to get inflation. Their target number is 2%. They want to try to get the inflationary effect on the dollar and assets to rise 2%. But if it goes too high, it could also destroy the economy. If it goes too low, you go into deflation, stagnation, deflation, and there's all kinds of other ripple effects. So they've got all these tools in their tool belt to try to control fiscal policy, monetary policy, and try to keep this equilibrium of constantly inflating values to pay down that debt without letting it go off the rails in either direction.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I read an article yesterday, and again, I'm not calling for 4% inflation, but this was the example in the article. Basically, if the Fed was successful in getting inflation at 4% for 4 years, that would allow them to pay off roughly 20% of their debt because it just compounds, right? Or maybe it was 5 years. It was probably 5 years. But again, this is the government knows they owe a lot of people a lot of stuff, and if they can get some inflation and pay it off with, in the future, better with inflation, that's what they want. And again, this whole used to be 2%. Now we're going to take anything up to 3%. I think that's more to keep Wall Street in check. They would probably welcome 4%, at least for a couple of years. They don't want 10% or 12% or anything wacky like that, because that'll destroy the economy. But yeah, they're going to run hot for a couple of years, I think.
Yeah. And then the question becomes, well, what does that mean to us, right?
Exactly.
To American citizens and to us that are investors. While that inflation rate, they're trying to keep at 2%, the reality is that the cost of our services and our goods are much higher than that. So when we talk about the average inflation is 3% per year for real estate or for the cost of goods, the reality is when you look at the things that are most purchased by Americans, real inflation's been 4 to 5% per year for decades, right?
Easy,
and so one of the things as a real estate investor I think about is if I'm modeling out my numbers to where I think I'm going to be in the future, if I think my rents are going to keep going up and my expenses are going to stay the same, I'm going to lose money, right? So I'm making sure that every year I'm modeling all my expenses going up 3%. To be really conservative, you could go 4%. But the cost of my insurance and the cost of my utilities they're going up 3 or 4% per year, sometimes even more than that, right? And so the cost of providing housing is going to go up 3 or 4%. I need to make sure that I'm able to raise my rents 3 or 4% a year to keep up with that. And so as the cost of goods go up and they're inflated and we experience, consumer price index inflation and the like, I also have to be able to raise my rents to keep up with that. And so we've got to think about at what point can I keep raising rents to keep up with it? If I raise my rents, the value of my property is going to go up. But do we ever reach a place where we just max out affordability all over the country and people cannot pay the rents that we need to sustain the growing expenses? So we have to buy right. We have to buy cheap and not pay top dollar in retail for properties that don't have some upside, in those rents to be able to keep the rents up to keep up with the increasing costs that we have. So that's how I think about inflation, is a lot.
Yeah, when I think about inflation, or at least, trying to talk to new investors, there's really three aspects of it as experienced investors. One happens, what happens to our balance sheet, right? Most cases, our debt is fixed. Our assets will inflate in value. Then there's rent, right? Rents, as you said, hopefully rents are increasing more than the costs because they are increasing, taxes included in that.
Yes.
And then there's, oh, by the way, we've both said we have a fair amount of cash sitting on the sidelines, and you have all these people talking about cash, being a bad investment today. And maybe that's true if you're thinking decades into the future, but I'm happy to be sitting on cash today because I see, as we talked about in episode 1 and 2, there may be pain in the very near future. Again, near future in my world's 3, 4, 6 quarters. So I'm happy to have cash today. I'm not too worried about losing a couple of pennies to inflation today. Is that fair?
It is fair. And my mindset has shifted on this, over the last couple of years. I never wanted my cash sitting there. My biggest challenge in talking to lenders is, and this is why I don't have a lot of Fannie Mae deals, is because they want 3 to 6 months reserves for every property that you have. Well, the more properties you have, that's a lot of money in cash. I'm like, why would I keep, 6 figures in cash when I could use it to buy another property to make me several $1,000s more a month, right? Mm-hmm. But to the banks, they see liquidity as safety, right? So I didn't like to hold much. I wanted to keep my money moving, because if you sit on cash, it's like putting the money under the mattress, right? And inflation devalues the value of that cash that's sitting under the mattress. But at the same time, we have to weigh what are the risks of not having it, right? And so there's lost opportunity costs if you don't have cash, when there is a sale on properties and you can't buy them if you don't have the cash sitting there. Yeah. But also it helps you to keep moving as an investor, because lenders trust you more when you have reserves. They will keep lending to you despite, changes that might happen in real estate, because you've shown that you can be principled and keep it and have it in reserves. But it also, it truly does bring safety. And in the pandemic, when this all started, I had upwards of 1,000+ units. I mean, we've bought a few during that time, but that's a lot of fear that what if this pandemic goes bad and all these people can't pay? How do I weather it? You weather it by having cash reserves. Those that went into forbearance because they didn't have enough operational reserves set aside to be able to weather this storm that nobody could have anticipated, right? But now that I've gone through this, it's kind of like you go through 2008 and 2009 and you realize, wow, debt is not good unless it's, for cash flowing real estate, right? You learn, and I've learned even more through this pandemic that I'm more comfortable with holding more cash than I've ever been, because it's what allowed me to sleep at night through this pandemic, and really to be able to not lose my shirt, right? So you learn these things with experience, where on paper, no, it doesn't make sense. Why would I keep all this cash? But it's an important thing to have as you're able to do it, and as you grow as an investor. Cash really is provides safety.
Yeah, for me, it's that one word, or I guess it's 2 words: opportunity cost.
Yeah.
Because again, lots of things can change. Just think about the 3 episodes we've done. Interest rates could go up, lending standards can change, forbearance and small landlords could be a real problem that maybe we didn't anticipate.
Yeah.
Again, as I kind of chuckled, and I think it was episode 1, I'm like, wow, I'm kind of excited. And then we talked about here about having the cash position that we have and the experience to look good to a lender. 2021 or maybe 2022 could be another bang up year. I would, selfishly speaking, I would love another 2010. That was my most active year because everything was on sale. That'd be okay.
Yeah. And, just circling back to kind of like the rates and knowing what could happen with asset values and going up, like, yes, we're kind of at a top of the market, but I had a deal come to me a couple of weeks ago that I was like, I might buy it, I might not. They had to hit my price point, right? But rates were half a point lower, and I passed on it. I kind of held off. Now rates are half a point higher, and I'm like, it's still a good deal, but here's the number I'd be willing to pay. But the only reason I'm probably going to go forward with it, if we can negotiate it, is because I do believe that the value of assets in my area will keep going up, and I can lock in this extremely low rate for a long time. So sometimes purchasing decisions that don't look great, in one environment, when rates start to change and you see that inflation is coming, they can make an opportunity much better, than what it would have been without that inflation coming and rates low and about to rise.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the things I harp on, is watching the market, learn what's going on. And the market being not only real estate prices and listings and pendings, but also lending and standards and the overall economy. That's why the daily financial news exists on my channel. And I change my mind all the time. Like one day it's a bad deal. Next day it's like, oh, you know what? I may need to do that one because something has changed. It's just odd. So I'm
Yeah.
glad you brought that up. Any closing thoughts for these 3 episodes?
Just keep your eyes on the market. Real estate is more than just the brick and mortar. You're buying an income stream, you're buying cash flow, you're buying the future, upside on these buildings. And you have to get really educated and start spending some time watching what outside factors impact, the value of your properties, the rent and your profitability. And these kind of things, interest rates, inflation, they will have a real impact on your investing eventually, as you do this long enough. So don't think this is too complicated, I don't need to understand it. Start learning the basics, because it should impact, the decisions that you make as an investor.
Thank you very much for your time this week. These have been 3 great episodes. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you so much.